Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's program. Anything you can do, AI can do better. Or can it? Comparing ChatGPT's search strategy outputs with Cochrane review searches. And I'm so glad that you're here joining us today. Catherine Howell is a health sciences librarian at the Health Sciences Library at UNC, University of North Carolina, where she provides expert searching services, instruction, and research assistance to students, faculty, and staff in health sciences disciplines. Before joining UNC, she was a research and instruction librarian and liaison to the College of Health and Human Sciences at North Carolina Agricultural and Technological State University, and she received her MSLAS from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And now I turn it over to Catherine. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm going to talk about some research that some colleagues and I did, and we presented it at the Medical Library Association's annual conference last year. And so we essentially looked at whether or how ChatGPT performed compared to human created searches by Cochrane reviews. So I'm Catherine Howell, but I also had some colleagues at UNC assist me in this work, Rebecca Carlson, Emily Jones, and Beth Morton. For those of you who are watching along, if you would like to receive a copy of the slides as well as a list of all the references we use, you can access the short URL shown on the screen right now. I'll also drop that in the chat really quickly for you. There we go. So as a bit of introduction, I'm going to provide just a few definitions. I know that there's a lot of talk about AI and that a lot of people already know these, but just to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page, these are some terms that I'll use frequently throughout this presentation. So generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI for short, is a type of AI that creates or generates new content such as text or images based on patterns learned from existing data. A large language model is a type of AI model that uses deep learning techniques to understand and generate human language, and they're highly skilled in text-based tasks like generation, translation, and summarization because they're trained with large data sets of human language. And then a GPT, or a generative pre-trained transformer, is a specific type of LLM that receives prompts from a user and then predicts and generates the appropriate response in human-like language. So ChatGPT is obviously a type of GPT and a type of LLM, and that kind of falls within the umbrella term of generative AI. So as some of you may know, high-quality systematic reviews require a large amount of time and expertise, especially the construction of systematic review search strings, which can be quite complex. Several studies have found AI and large language models could be potentially time-saving technology throughout the systematic review process. Lee Barham et al. Performed a scoping review of studies using LLMs for systematic reviews, and an image from their study is shown on this slide. Of the 15 prior studies of LLMs used for systematic review searching, they found that only four found LLM use promising. 3 studies had neutral findings, and 8 studies found LLMs for systematic review searching non-promising. So that's the red box shown there. And in fact, searching was the least promising option out of all parts of the systematic review process, as you can see here. There are some existing studies that show the benefits and limitations of using LLMs for systematic searching. Some of those benefits are the potential to generate searches for PubMed, Medline, and Scopus. They can aid in the search translations process. They have been shown to save time in the initial searching or brainstorming process, and they are skilled at various text-based tasks like identifying spelling errors, missing Boolean operators, etc. However, LLM use for systematic searching is obviously not without limitations or challenges. So some studies have found that searches often have low recall when generated by LLMs. These models often struggle with database-specific syntax and can fabricate index terms like mesh terms. They're often unable to incorporate established search filters and hedges. They're heavily reliant on user prompts, They typically require librarian validation and oversight. And finally, there's a lack of transparency and reproducibility. Few studies have actually attempted to validate ChatGPT searches against human-generated searches, um, but it's not clear whether those human searches were validated or evaluated for efficiency. So this brings us to our research, and our primary research question was, what is ChatGPT's current capability to produce comprehensive search strategies for systematic reviews? And kind of within that, our sub questions are compared to published Cochrane review search strategies, what are the relative recall and precision of AI-generated search strategies? How do relative recall and precision differ for search strategies generated by ChatGPT's different models? How do AI-generated search strategies perform on the press evidence-based checklist? And finally, can ChatGPT replicate publicly available validated search filters? So I'll give some more specifics and kind of define some of those terms within each of those, but that kind of guided our research process. So methods. Our primary goal was to compare human performance in the form of Cochrane systematic reviews to large language model performance, which would be ChatGPT. So first, we identified 9 Cochrane reviews that were published in 2024, which was the prior year, with PubMed in the title or abstract to serve as our gold standards for human-created search strategies. And for each of those 9 papers, we extracted the research questions, the specific PubMed search strategy, and the PubMed IDs of the included studies for each one. We also reran those Cochrane searches to make sure that there were no problems with them and to determine our performance baseline. And finally, we prompted ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 models for systematic review searches on the same topics. We chose to test in ChatGPT because it's one of the most well-known and most used large language models. It's used in 89% of prior studies testing LLMs for systematic review searching. And it's also because we could access the free 3.5 and paid 4 models for ChatGPT. Our gold standard topics ranged across various disciplines, populations, and types of interventions. So these are the titles of each of the 9 reviews that we used. However, you will note that multiple focused on newborns, which could be a potential limitation. We chose to use a detailed and guided prompt for our GPT prompt because prior studies have shown that adding context and more thorough instructions improves the performance of ChatGPT. So we started by providing the definition of a systematic review, the specific research objective that we extracted from the Cochrane review, as well as the key search concepts from the Cochrane review. And we developed this kind of iteratively. We had a few different members of the team kind of test these and retry these until we got to a prompt that felt sufficient. Once we provided that information, we asked for a list. We asked ChatGPT to provide a list of search terms, a list of mesh headings, and then asked ChatGPT to combine those into a Boolean search with appropriate field tags. If the Cochrane review had a filter for randomized controlled trials or for specifically human studies only, we also asked ChatGPT to provide one. And for the Cochrane reviews that utilized a validated filter, like the Cochrane highly sensitive search strategy for RCTs, we specifically asked ChatGPT to add that filter. And to compare ChatGPT to the Cochrane reviews, we first ran the human, which is what I'll refer to as the Cochrane searches. We first ran the human and ChatGPT search strategies for each of the 9 Cochrane topics and recorded the total number of articles retrieved for each one in PubMed. We then ran searches for the PubMed IDs from the included articles in the Cochrane studies, and we recorded the number of gold standard relevant articles that are indexed in each search's results. So how many studies did the searches find that they were meant to find or that were ultimately included in that review? Next, we performed a simple analysis, including counting the number of mesh terms and the number of keywords per search. and we calculated recall, precision, and F1 scores relative to the Cochrane studies. And I'll go into further detail and kind of define those different metrics in a moment. Finally, librarians from our team peer reviewed each of the 27 searches. So that's 27 because there are 9 that were produced by humans for the Cochrane searches, 9 produced by GPT 3.5, that model, and then 9 produced by the GPT-4 model. And we reviewed those using the Press 2015 evidence-based checklist, and that was developed by McGowan in 2016. And you can see on this slide the different elements that were evaluated for each search. We had members of our team blindly complete checklist for each of those search strategies and compared results. So getting in specifically to our results and what we found. So the first thing we did as a simple analysis is that we compared the length of the searches in terms of mesh subjects and keywords. Um, the human searches in the Cochrane reviews averaged about 11 mesh terms per search, which is about 2 to 3 mesh terms for each part of the clinical question, with about 4 to 5 pico components and filters. The GPT models both added more mesh terms, as you can see, although these numbers do not necessarily reflect applicability to the topic. And ChatGPT 3.5 actually confabulated or made up over 40% of the mesh terms that it added to the search. It's a good deal less than the 55% fake mesh terms that were found in Wang 2023, but we did note that GPT-4 performed significantly better with only 8% of the mesh terms that it included that were fake. Across the board, the searches averaged about the same number of keywords and phrases per search, but it should be noted that these were not always unique keywords. So in our findings, ChatGPT 3.5 would often repeat variations of the same keyword several times. So for example, it would include the keyword light, but then it would also search the keywords dim light and cycled light, which would already be captured by the simple light term. So those were duplicative. Additionally, less than 1% of the human produced keywords generated phrase not found errors in PubMed, compared to 5.6% in GPT-4 and nearly 12% in GPT 3.5. Phrase not found errors don't necessarily prevent a search from running. They don't prevent the search from running in PubMed, but it does require some effort to address if you're adapting that search, and those keywords aren't actually resulting in anything in PubMed. Next, we calculated recall, and so we defined recall as the number of relevant results returned over the total number of relevant results included in the Cochrane study that were indexed in PubMed. And the simplest way to think of that is the number of articles found by the search over the total number it was possible to find. So the human-generated searches, as might be expected, had the highest recall at 93.66%, which means that their searches would find almost every PubMed citation they were supposed to. It's not a perfect 100%, which is interesting. 5 out of 9 Cochrane studies, though, did achieve 100% recall of all the PubMed citations that were ultimately included in their review. ChatGPT-4 was slightly lower and had 87% recall, and only 4 out of the 9 searches achieved 100% recall. In general, ChatGPT 3.5 searches found a little over half of the citations they were supposed to, and only 2 out of the 9 had 100% recall. So GPT 3.5 performed significantly less than GPT-4 on this metric. Precision is the number of relevant results over total results returned from a search. So a lower number means that the authors would have to screen more irrelevant citations because their search was imprecise. However, as some of you know who regularly conduct systematic review searches often do have less precision in order to ensure that they're capturing all of the citations possible. So you can kind of think of that as number of articles retrieved that they were supposed to over the total number the search found overall. Um, ChatGPT 4 actually had the highest average precision, but I think it is worth noting that the Cochrane authors of those 9 studies may have purposely built their search in a way that reduced precision in order to ensure the completeness of their reviews. So that's often a trade-off that happens. And we also have the range listed below for each of these. So we have the average as well as the range there. The F1 score is known as the harmonic mean of precision and recall. It gives a balanced view of a model's performance by combining precision and recall numbers. Models closer to 1 as their F1 score are performing better than models with numbers close to 0. Zero point 0.9 and higher are excellent performance with a good balance of precision and recall. Zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.9 are considered good performance. 0.5 to zero point 0.7 need improvement, and anything below zero point 0.5 is considered poor performance. Um, Here we'll see that all 3 of these, so both the human and the ChatGPT scores, fall into the poor performance category. But again, especially for the human searches, this could just be an attempt to capture all of the evidence through an overly broad search. But this F1 score could indicate that the humans could potentially build their searches more effectively while still capturing all the relevant results. But you can see that the F1 scores are relatively comparable for each of the 3, and GPT-4 actually had a higher F1, average F1 score than the human scores. And Jessica, I see your question in the chat. Yes, we did update the analysis to include GPT-5, and we're going to publish those results hopefully. So those are under review at a publication. So we did update those, but for this presentation, we had just looked at 3.5 and 4. I will say, just as a summary, I will say GPT-5 did perform relatively similar across the board to GPT-4, which is the paid model we had access to for this study. So it was pretty comparable. 4 and 5 didn't vary too much in terms of their numbers. But thank you. That's a great question. So when completing our press evaluations of the search strategies, we found that several of the Cochrane strategies had errors in their searches. These typically included the overuse of parentheses, as well as placing field tags outside of parentheses, which rendered them useless. And so as a result, kind of surprisingly, press results for the human gold standard were kind of spread across the board. We were expecting no revisions for all 9, but you can see 3 were rated as no revisions, 4 were rated as revisions suggested, and 2 required revisions. The way that works is if there are any, for the press checklist, if there are at least 1 things that are suggested, then that's kind of its overall rating. And if there are at least 1 things that are required, then that's required as its overall rating. Neither of the ChatGPT models provided a perfect search, as you might expect. And the majority of scores for both of the GPT models we tested were revisions required. So you can see that neither one of them had searches that needed no revisions. Only 1 search for GPT 3.5 and 2 for GPT 4 had revisions that were suggested but not required, but the vast majority needed revisions in order to work well. This slide details the main issues with the GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 searches from the press reviews. The GPT searches, and especially those for GPT 3.5, included many overly broad keyword terms. So, for example, they would frequently include things like low birth weight infant instead of just infant. And they would often include infant in addition, which is duplicative. There were also many confabulated mesh terms, as I noted earlier. So those did not return any results and were not correct, which indicates that ChatGPT could not search in the mesh hierarchy. Um, I mentioned before that there were duplicative keywords that were unnecessary. And one of those examples is light, dim light, or cycled light, all three being included. And additionally, ChatGPT was unable to correctly use a validated filter like the Cochrane highly sensitive search strategy for RCTs, similar to the findings of previous studies that I mentioned in the literature review. GPT-4 did succeed, but that was only one time. So for one of those searches. Um, the GPT search is also incorrectly limited to human studies only. So typically, the best way to limit to human studies only would be doing a not search. So not animals, not humans is typically what you'll see for most systematic reviews. But for the GPT generated ones, often if they were asked to limit to human studies only, they would just add and humans to a search instead of using that typical not formulation. So I'll get into kind of what all this means. Um, and this slide details the pros and cons of Gen AI use, and specifically in this case, ChatGPT's use for systematic searching. The main pro of using it is the time saved. So first drafts of search strategies can be generated in much less time than with manual workflows. ChatGPT can provide long lists of potential keyword terms. And so librarians can kind of review that list for inclusion, but not have to create that entire list themselves. And ChatGPT also seems able to create search strategies without any errors in search syntax or logic. So librarians would not need to spend much time creating or reviewing those aspects of the search when asking ChatGPT to do it. However, as you can see, the pros side of the list is a bit shorter than the cons side of the list here. There are many issues that would need to be addressed if you were planning on using AI for systematic searching. So first is the instance of confabulation. So nearly half of the mesh terms produced by GPT 3.5 were fake. And even with improvements in GPT-4, fake mesh terms were still an issue. And we found this with GPT-5 as well. So that continued to be a problem. There were duplicative and lengthy keywords. So it kept providing unnecessary variations in keyword terms, even when our prompt itself did prompt GPT to be less repetitive. So that was included in the prompt we had. Um, there were lower recall with the GPT searches than with the human searches. So they were less effective at finding papers we knew to be relevant. Um, ChatGPT could perform better potentially with different prompts or if given links to validated filters in the mesh database, but that would require extensive effort for proper fine tuning. So the amount of work you would have to put in to kind of build that prompt would almost be more time than if a human just generated that themselves. There's also a very high variability in results, so interactions are very model and prompt dependent, and this was found by other researchers as well. Um, there are many different studies that tested GPT performance over weeks or months, and responses were not static. Um, and obviously, you all know that there's even more models that are available now than were when we did this study. And so, as new models continue to come out, that variation will continue to happen. There are also broader issues with AI that we need to mention. I know many of you all are aware of the ethics of AI, but I think this is relevant here as well. There are issues with energy and water consumption. There are many statistics about how detrimental AI usage will be for the environment, such as one ChatGPT generated email being equivalent to leaving 14 LED light bulbs on for 1 hour. Human search methods might take a little bit longer or more expertise, but they would use a fraction of the energy and water required to power AI data centers. There's also some issues with the currency of training data. So for a long time, ChatGPT was only trained with data through 2021, and now some models are updated with more recent data. But even with some of those recent updates, there's sometimes a year lag in the data that that model was trained with. There's also many biases present. So training data for ChatGPT has not been shared and is not transparent. But in a study by Cow in 2025, um, they found significant variation in performance based on discipline. And Shelley found a bias towards American authors or English language papers. And there could also be malicious biases from bad actors as well. Um, Finally, there's really no formal reporting framework for reproducibility. Two, in their 2025 study, notes that there are no formal best practices or reporting frameworks for reproducibility that exist yet. Hopefully, that is work that will be done in the future, but as for now, it's not available. So, for some considerations, our study and most other studies in our literature review indicate that ChatGPT could serve as a starting point for generating a systematic review search. But these tools will always need human oversight to ensure accuracy and comprehensiveness. So, this is never something that you would want to just run and go ahead and use without significant oversight. The results are highly dependent on the model of Gen AI used and the prompting it receives. And although ChatGPT seems to understand systematic reviews enough to build a Boolean search, um, ChatGPT or Gen AI in general does not really appear to be capable of making best practice decisions on its own. Um, One other thing to note is that in our prompt, we prompted when we prompted for the searches to include field tags, even though we provided multiple field tag options, like we gave title or abstract or text word as kind of examples of field tags that could be used. Universally across the board, both GPT models used title or abstract every single time, regardless of having other options. One of the biggest issues in this line of research is that studies like ours are already outdated at the time of presentation or publication. Um, so OpenAI has already decided to remove GPT-4 and replace it with 4.0. And there are also more models being released at any point, like Jessica mentioned in the chat. So a big difficulty with this line of research is kind of constantly being behind. But hopefully the study that we publish in the future it'll be more recent than this one. So that's good. Oh, and one last thing. So in general, I like Al Shami et al.'s recommendations that when implementing Gen AI use into systematic searching, you should consider using a structured framework to integrate uh, those tools into the systematic review process with frequent human oversight and validation at various checkpoints throughout the building of that search, rather than just at the end. So kind of constantly following along with what that model is producing. Our study was not without limitations. There were a few. First is that we only tested one Gen AI tool, so we only looked at ChatGPT. And although it's the most popular used in this field of research, there are many other chatbots and GPTs available. Second, the training data and behind the scenes updates to ChatGPT are a mystery to us. Our prompts were conducted over a short time span, over a total of 2 weeks. But even in that short 2 week span, we cannot guarantee if there are any modifications or changes made to ChatGPT during that time or to either of those models. We also, as you may have noticed, have a very small data set, and several of our search topics were focused on the newborn population. This is because we decided to test in PubMed. PubMed is a database that we have access to and that everyone has access to, but that did limit us to only being able to include Cochrane reviews that searched PubMed specifically, which is why when we found those 9 reviews, they were all recent and from the last year and searched in PubMed. But many Cochrane reviews searched in search Medline in other ways or search different databases, so they weren't able to be included. So that kind of led to that small data set. We also assumed that the Cochrane data was entirely correct, and we did not rescreen, like we did not perform these reviews ourselves. So it's possible that some of the newer citations that were included in our search were relevant, but they were counted against GPT and precision calculations. For most studies in our sample, we did not have original search results numbers to look at. So they did not report that. So we were just using those baseline numbers we calculated ourselves. But we did control somewhat for new studies being added because we included the entire result number for both the human searches and the GPT searches. Results vary with other models of Gen AI, different prompting frameworks, other strategies like using seed studies or fine-tuning the GPT. Um, we used one very specific prompt that we developed ourselves, but there are many, many different ways of prompting or creating prompts. And it would be interesting in the future to see how different types of prompts or different prompting strategies performed comparatively. As far as some conclusions, our major conclusions are that more studies are needed to understand how to most effectively interact with Gen AI tools like ChatGPT for systematic review searching. So there's not a lot of guidance on best practices or what kinds of prompts might work best. We again generated our own, and once we publish these results, we do share the prompt there. But the more research that is done on this, the more studies or the more information will be available to craft prompts in an effective way. Initial indications from this study show that ChatGPT is not able to complete systematic review searches. So yay. I think a lot of times librarians are kind of worried that our jobs are at risk. And in this instance, I can say that I am not at all worried about ChatGPT's capabilities for replacing us in this aspect. But it could be a helpful tool for experts like librarians to use when developing their own search strategies, as long as they have some manual editing in the process. Overall, GPT-4 performed better than GPT 3.5. In our new testing of GPT-5, it performed relatively similar to GPT-4 in most accounts and maybe slightly better, but pretty equivalent with GPT-4. Some avenues for future studies. That might include testing additional reviews with ChatGPT. So it's kind of expanding that data set to more reviews than just kind of the core 9 that we used. Testing additional models of GPT as they come out. Testing other large language models, whether that's Claude, Copilot, or some of the others that are available. And then rechecking in the future to see if or how ChatGPT improves. So it could be that in 3 years, it does perform much better at this task and has much more comparable numbers. But at this point, it is not equivalent to a human search, but it would be worthwhile to continue to check that into the future. So overall, those are our conclusions. And Again, the link to the slides and references if you would like to review any of those. I also have my contact information shown on the slide. I'm happy, I know I finished a bit early. I'm happy to take any questions that you all have now, but if you have kind of more specific questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd also be happy to provide that prompt if you shoot me an email as well. So I'll go ahead and pause, and anyone who has questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. And as you all are thinking of questions, or if there aren't any questions, one other thing I would love to know is if any of you all have kind of experimented with using ChatGPT or another generative AI model for any kind of similar searching task. It would be great to hear your experience as well.
Looks like we're not getting any questions. I do want to thank you, though, for sharing your research on this and everything that you learned. It was very good. And with that, I will end the presentation. We did get a couple of comments. There is a question now.
Yeah, about a short form synopsis. Yeah, that's a great idea. We don't have one currently, but I think that is something that we should consider. doing. Eventually, we'll have a study with an abstract that would be somewhat of a summation, but I think that is a great idea and something I'll bring up to the team about producing something to distribute to faculty. And Matthew, yeah, I think that is probably one of the more frustrating things is the making up of mesh terms. That was a problem kind of throughout, and even as the models got better, that continued to happen.
Great. Well, thank you again, and I will end for everyone now. Have a good day.
Thank you, Christine.